Evening, everyone. My name is Jan Matern. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Emerge Venture Lab, which runs Emerge Education. Over the last 3 months, we've worked with some of the most talented teams that we've ever met, and we are convinced that they're going to change education in fundamental ways. By the end of tonight, I know that you will feel the same way. At this point, I'd like to give my heartfelt gratitude to everyone that's made this program a possibility. We appreciate your wisdom, your shared vision for a different education system, and the countless hours of support that you've given to support these companies' growth. We feel honored that you're part of this community. So please join me in giving a big round of applause to all the mentors, investors, teachers, schools partners, our venture partners, Martin, Raj, and Volker, the Emerge Education team, Mark, Emil, Krish, and Toby, and last but not least, our awesome host here tonight and over the last 3 months, Campus. Thank you, guys. Tonight, Emerge Education is presenting its first ever cohort of education technology startups to the world. So you're going to hear from 6 exciting companies innovating in language learning, educational data management, and content delivery. But to properly kick us off, I want to invite a very special man on stage. Robert Tercek has been a senior executive in several large media companies, most recently as the vice president of digital media at OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network, and previously as the senior vice president of digital media at Sony and the creative director at MTV. And he's also started 5 companies, as you do, and 7th level went public in 1993. So needless to say, we're super excited to have him join us here today, and please join me in welcoming Robert.
Right on. Hi. Hey, I'm happy to be here. I was flattered to get the invitation from Volker and Jan, and when they asked me to come talk about the future of education, the more I thought about it, the more I thought there's some urgency here. There's a fierce urgency at stake, and I want to acquaint you with why I feel the matter of reinventing education is so very, very important. What you're working on is not just a cool thing to do or an exciting opportunity. It's important for our entire society. I'm going to talk to you about the implications of the information age, and I know what you're thinking. Some people see this slide and they say, oh, amigo. That is, for those who don't know it, that means my eyes glaze over. Like, we've been living with this phrase for 30 or 40 years, the information society, the information age, the information economy, and we kind of take that phrase not even seriously. We don't even listen to it anymore. We've become numb to the concept. And maybe that's because of overuse. Maybe that's because you can't see it, so it's not tangible. But actually, the information economy is changing things in some profound ways, and it will change the education industry. But there are some skeptics. Peter Drucker, the management consultant, the management theorist, he was one of the skeptics. He paid attention to the information technology business his entire career, wrote about it in very interesting ways. He had 2 observations that I think I would share with you tonight. The first one is that he noted that the high technology industry doesn't create very many jobs. So in terms of its contribution to the economy, he saw that it does do many terrific things, but job creation is not something that we can look to the high technology or the information technology businesses for. I think I would agree with that, but the second point that he made quite often is that there's been a massive investment in technology and that it hasn't yet shown up in productivity gains or profits for the businesses. In fact, he said it works the opposite way. Because companies buy technology, then they have to spend money training employees how to use it, and then those employees expect to get an increase in their wages because they now have a new skill. And so he said it works the opposite way. And that was true during his lifetime, but the reason I disagree with him is that he died before he got to see the real impact of the information age or the information technology. We've been predicting this for so long that I think a lot of us didn't notice what happened in the last few years. I'll show it to you from this chart that was published in The Economist a couple of years ago. It's a very good chart. As you can see, we're reaching a point where we're generating more information each year than the previous years, and actually all the previous years combined. In 2009, between 2009 and 2010, we crossed a very important threshold. We crossed a threshold where human society as a whole generated more than 1 zettabyte of data. A zettabyte, what's that? Well, here's a picture that illustrates what a zettabyte is. We all know about gigabytes and terabytes. We have those at home, our hard drives. We used to measure information in exabytes, and 1,000 exabytes is a zettabyte. Okay, so let me put that in perspective for you. That would be 200, let's see, sorry about that. That's 250 billion DVDs. So 1 zettabyte, you could fill football stadiums with DVDs and still not have as much information as we generate in a single year. Another way to think of it, though, is you know those little 1 gig flash drives that they give away at conferences? Well, now imagine a stack of 1 million of those. And now imagine, I'm having a hard time controlling my computer here. Imagine 1 million stacks of 1 million 1 gigabyte flash drives. That's a zettabyte of data. It's an extraordinary amount of information. It's incredibly difficult for us to visualize what that means. And that's not the end of it. In fact, the generation of information is accelerating, as we all experience in our own lives, in our own inboxes, and our own sharing. From 2009 till the end of this decade, 2020, they expect that number to increase 35-fold. So we're generating information at an extraordinary rate, faster than anything humanity has ever created before. And for that reason, there's a bit of a gold rush going on in the information era. It's not just the NSA that's going after information on a wholesale basis. Many companies are going after it. Among VCs and investors and some technologists, there's a slogan they like to use. They throw it around a lot called, "Data is the new oil." That sounds cool. But I actually think that there's a second meaning there. It's actually a very profoundly important meaning for you folks tonight. Data is the new oil means it's a new resource that can be mined. And it can be mined in different ways. It's used for in different ways in different businesses. So information can be used as a substitute, for instance. And it can be used as a substitute for material. So if you think about all the virtualized businesses, the businesses that are now starting to use cloud hosting and cloud infrastructure, for instance, they don't have to buy all that equipment. That's a way to use information resources as a substitute for material or for infrastructure. You can use information as a substitute for capital. Think of crowdfunding a business as a great illustration of that. But what I'm concerned with tonight is the use of information as a substitute for labor. There's been a revolution in the field of robotics in the last few years. You probably have read about it or heard about it. There are some extraordinary things coming. For instance, this is what most auto factories have looked like for about 20 years. And what you'll notice about this, there's two things you'll notice about it. There are no people on the floor at all. And the reason for that is these are dumb robots. These robots can't see. They aren't able to sense their environment around them. So they're actually quite dangerous for humans to be near. You'll see that whole floor is sort of fenced off with glass panels. So effectively, we've turned our auto manufacturing plants into giant machines. You put parts in one end, and out comes cars on the other end of it. But that's kind of an old picture. This is the new face of robotics. This is Baxter. It's a $20,000 robot. That puts it in the range of affordability for any small business. And this is a robot that any worker can teach in about a half an hour. It can teach it how to do some repetitive task. And you can actually train each arm separately, so it can do 2 repetitive tasks. It's viewed as something that's an enhancement, not a substitute for some labor. In some cases, it would free a worker to do perhaps a task that's a little bit more demanding and liberate him from stuffing boxes or stacking things or something like that. The other cool thing about Baxter is that it's sensitive to its environment. So it has a face, as you can see, and it's actually aware of what's around it, so it won't crash into people. It's aware of them. So this is a big advance, and this just came out last year. Of course, you've heard about the robot cars from Google, the autonomous vehicles that can drive. And now every major auto manufacturer in the world has an autonomous vehicle program underway. And you'll see those cars hit the road probably by 2020 or 2025. The biggest thing holding them back right now is tort law. Most countries require there to be a driver so that there can be someone who's at fault if there's an accident. If you have a robotic car, it raises all kinds of interesting legal questions. Who's responsible? The maker of the car, the maker of the software, the driver, the owner of the car? It's a good question. It won't be solved until we have a lot of court cases, and so that'll keep those cars off the road for a while. It's not just that we're substituting information for human labor in the form of auto workers or car drivers, truck drivers, but here's a team that plans to launch an artificial honeybee. So honeybees play a very important role in our society, in our agriculture. They seed plants like almond trees. Without them, you couldn't have a lot of agriculture. About a third of the agriculture we depend on would go away. So they're trying to develop a robotic honeybee using information to substitute for the labor of the bee. In Germany, there's already an electronic bartender who can serve you a drink. And in the US, there's now a robotic restaurant that can grill a burger just to your satisfaction, made fresh for you. And of course, if you introduce robots into trade shows, the next thing you're going to do is teach them how to pole dance. And so we have pole dancing robots as well. Robots aren't confined to this space. Robots are great at working in places where humans can't, such as outer space. This is a photo of the SpaceX spaceship that is refueling the space station. That is an entirely robotic mission from start to finish. And of course, we have a small ambassador on another planet 100 million miles away that's done more intergalactic research than any human has in about a year and a half. It's really quite extraordinary. So we have the Curiosity robot on Mars right now that is our ambassador to that planet, and it's gathering soil samples and trying to detect signs of life on that other planet. There are some darker implications here. The US Army is quite supportive of the concept of robots. They've been enthusiastic. They've embraced them enthusiastically. They were the initial impetus behind the DARPA challenge that launched the robotic cars and so forth. So they expect that a huge percentage of the armed forces will be replaced by robots. Of course, that's already happening, so that's not news. We have these flying killer robots called Predator drones, which is kind of a chilling concept. I think 10 years ago, if someone told you that there would be flying killer robots, you'd say, come on, that sounds like science fiction. Today, it's an all too grim reality. But the robots aren't just in the field and in the factory. Automation is actually starting to affect the workforce right where we live, white-collar workers. And this has become quite a big story. You've seen it in every newspaper. Here's the FT, the rise of replicants. Rapid advances in artificial intelligence now threaten the jobs of educated white-collar workers. See, we always thought, well, okay, repetitive tasks on a factory floor or dangerous tasks, those are good things for robots to do, but they'll never come into our domain. We can retreat into the knowledge arena. But as robots and artificial intelligence systems like Watson have demonstrated, actually, robots can now beat us at some of our own games. And there are some extraordinary stories coming out on a weekly basis. I live in Los Angeles. Just 2 weeks ago, we had an earthquake. It wasn't a big earthquake. The first story that hit the newswire was this one from the Los Angeles Times. It was written by a robot. The article was written and published by a robot. Robots are now being used for data analysis, and robots are finding patterns that humans can't find. So automated processes are starting to replace data analysts. For instance, here we have robots searching for life on other planets. If you think about it, of course, that's a kind of huge data set that humans can't really easily grind through. For an automated system, that's easy. There are some implications here, some very dire ones. At risk, 47% of the jobs, by some estimates. There's a great article in The Atlantic, a US magazine recently, that detailed exactly what types of jobs were at risk, and quite a few of them are white-collar, rather high-paid jobs. So I'd say that after 4 decades of de-skilling work, we've now made it possible for humans to be substituted in half the jobs that exist. This is a real challenge. We've actually seen what happened. After 2008, something happened that I think Peter Drucker would have appreciated. It would have changed his opinion about that second comment I quoted a minute ago. You see, usually when there's an economic downturn, in countries with dynamic labor forces like the United States and Great Britain, labor does take an impact. It's sort of a shock absorber for the economy. And so workers get laid off as companies try to reorganize themselves and deal with the drop in demand. And then as the economy recovers, typically employment recovers. But as we've noticed in the last few years, the economy has recovered, but the jobs haven't come back. And one of the reasons for that is that over the past few decades, just about every business has invested in automation and information technology tools, but they've used them as maybe a supplement to the workforce. At some point, I think companies realized, well, we could probably start to lay people off or downsize or phase out some jobs, some clerical workers, for instance, but they were hesitant to do so because, frankly, there's stigma around that. When companies do it, it's a bad story, right? If you're going to replace your workforce with robots, that's going to be in the press, so it's negative. But during the economic downturn, the companies had no choice. And so they had to replace those workers. They had to downsize, they had to let the workers go, and what they found is they didn't need to backfill this time. They didn't need to replace those workers. So we may be in a permanent jobless recovery. And I think the implications of that are just starting to sink in, but that is a dire problem for society. This is where I'm going to switch now and start talking about education, in case you're wondering when I was going to get to the point. You know, for years, many critics of our industrialized education system have said, really, our schools, our public school systems are just factories that crank out workers. They teach people to stand in line. They teach people to do repetitive tasks in an obedient fashion. We teach children to line up outside the schoolhouse so that when they finish school, they're now prepared to line up outside the factory, or if they get laid off, they'll line up obediently outside of the soup kitchen, waiting for their free meal. We teach children to sit down at desks and follow orders so that they're well prepared when they enter the factory so they can sit at a machine and do the same task over and over and over again. And I wonder why. This observation's been made many times, but I wonder why that's the case. Why is it that our education system can't seem to produce the level of workers that industry demands? If you talk to CEOs of every company and their human resources departments, they'll tell you clearly the hardest time they're having right now is to find the right workers for their jobs. They feel that the education system that we have doesn't produce the right product. It doesn't produce workers who are trained, who are equipped and prepared to make intelligent and informed decisions in a dynamic environment. What we're producing instead are biological robots that are easily replaced by a machine. This is a crisis. I think the reason this happens is that with new technologies, very often what occurs first is a mimetic echo of the past. Think, for instance, of TV, a business I know very well. So in the TV business, we have soap operas, right? If you think about a modern drama, even arguably something like Game of Thrones, you could argue that there is a kind of soap opera aspect to that with all the drama and the melodrama and so forth. And of course, those stories came to us, that format came to us from radio plays, which were the original soap operas. Procter & Gamble, the big soap companies, sponsored those shows, and they wanted to get a big audience when radio first debuted in the 1920s. So they sponsored dramas, which themselves were a mimetic echo of stage plays. Of course, those go back thousands of years. And so what's happened is that three-act story structure that Greek playwrights like Sophocles pioneered and maybe perfected, that three-act story structure exists today as a mimetic echo of the past, but of course today it's used as the perfect story structure for a commercially sponsored program because there are three acts with commercial breaks in between each one. So what happens is we tend to repeat or echo technology. When we launch a new technology, we tend to repeat the forms of the past and embody them in the new technology in a way that all the new technology has to kind of surround that core, that echo of the past, and it lingers. And I think that's what's happening when we think about what happens in the educational system. We still have a distant echo of the printing press, of the Gutenberg-era. Because, of course, the printing press was many things. It wasn't just the first device to make a reproduced book, a mechanically reproduced book. Of course, it did that. It was also the first time you were able to productize information in a form that could be sold at mass scale. And it wasn't just that. You see, the printing press involved several sequential steps. It was the first time we actually had the division of labor. You see a person in that picture who's typesetting. You see another person who's operating the press. You see another person in the back who's melting lead. So they were able to divide up the tasks. This is before Adam Smith, but the concept existed. The printing press made it possible to divide up the labor that used to be involved in the creation of a book by a single person. And of course, they were able to produce much greater scale. So in a way, the printing press spawned mass production, the idea of taking something, breaking the job down, atomizing it into segments, and then repeating that at scale so that you can achieve something much bigger, production of much bigger scale at a much lower cost. That concept comes to us from the printing press and the mechanical reproduction of books as a product. And that's not all. You see, the printing press also enabled mass education. In the old days, the medieval era, before the printing press, the education system consisted of lectures. Literally, someone sitting in a chair reading to you. And that's because books were scarce. Information was very scarce. And so you listened. There was an audience that listened in a lecture. These are old words that talk about an auditory form of education. With the printing press, now suddenly each student in the room could have the identical text. And so you have this modern setting, but even schools 100 years ago had the exact same layout. A modern setting where every student was on the exact same page of a perfectly identical text. So the printing press made it possible for us to have mass education. Of course, that mass education system was there to prepare mass workers for a mass manufacturing society. So all those things fit together perfectly. What's strange to me is when we get into this modern era with digital technology, what do we do with it? How do we apply it in the school, in the classroom? We apply it like this, the exact same setup that we had 1,000 years ago. It's crazy. If you look at these school classrooms, no wonder they're empty. No one's using this gear. And of course, when students are using their computers, if you look over their shoulder, what you notice is they're not really paying attention to the medieval lecture in the front of the room. What they're doing is they're using YouTube, they're playing, they're chatting with friends, and so forth. I encourage everybody in this room to think beyond the book, liberate ourselves from the forms of the medieval era, and start to think about forms that are appropriate for the digital era. We can think beyond Gutenberg. The Gutenberg legacy of fixed media and static content hardwired into a book. And think beyond that, today's living network with fluid data, dynamic data systems that change as they're used, as they're shared, as more data is added, more information is shared. We can think beyond one-way presentation, like this talk that I'm giving to you now, with a passive audience sitting there. And instead, we can turn it into a two-way exchange, where the participants in the audience actually are active, where they have some meaningful role to play besides just sitting there looking at YouTube videos. We can also move beyond mass media or one-size-fits-all information, a sort of mass concept of education, towards multimodal dialogue that can be tailored to an individual, something that cultivates a lifelong passion for learning. This is my belief. This is what I expect will happen in the very near future, because the work situation, the labor situation, requires that we change the way we think about educating people, training them, and equipping them with lifelong skills. And I think this is going to be the interface. I think largely, you're going to see some examples tonight, I'm sure, of entrepreneurs who are developing mobile interfaces. And that's because we have this with us at all times. What the mobile phone on 4G has done has doubled our time that we spend on the internet. And 2 years ago, actually 2011, 3 years ago, time spent on the internet with mobile devices surpassed time spent on PCs. And I think you'll continue to see time spent on mobile devices surpass time spent in front of television sets. It already long ago passed the time we spend with printed material. So I think it's time for us to reorient our education systems around this new medium. Not in the form of some mimetic echo of the printed past, but something that's in the future. Something that involves mobility and personalization and the one-to-one communication or the one-to-many multimodal dialogue that we can enable with a mobile phone. Those are some of the principles I think you're going to see expressed today. The definition of an entrepreneur, Jean-Baptiste Say wrote it in 1800. He was a French economist, and he was the guy who coined the term entrepreneur. He said an entrepreneur shifts economic resources from an area of low productivity into areas of higher productivity and greater yield. It's a great definition. It remains the best definition. It's the one that Peter Drucker chose and said that's the best definition of an entrepreneur. I think we need to look to the entrepreneurs to reinvent education. I think if we look to the institutions of the past, the governments, the bureaucracies, the educational establishment, what we're going to get is more mimetic echoes of the past. And so I think it's time for us to turn our attention to the entrepreneurs in this room. The entrepreneurs are figuring out ways to take the resources we devote to education and apply them in much more useful, much more productive ways. So join me in giving a warm welcome to the entrepreneurs who are going to present tonight. You're going to hear about some amazing ideas about the future of education. And thank you very much for listening.